The desert at midnight was a world carved from silence. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, a deep velvet black scattered with 1,000 cold stars. The moon hung low and bright, bleaching the canyon walls in ghostly white. Cowboy Luke Harding guided his horse, Copper, along the narrow trail, letting the animal's instincts choose the safest footing. The night had a strange weight to it, heavy, watchful, like the land itself was holding its breath. Luke had been riding since dusk, scouting for a missing steer. But the deeper he went into the canyon, the more certain he became that something else was waiting out here. Copper's ears pinned back, tail twitching nervously. Luke slowed the horse, resting a hand on its neck. "Easy, boy. I feel it too." A sudden gust of wind swept through, carrying with it the distant scent of smoke and blood. Luke straightened in his saddle. Then he saw it, something pale lying beside the rocks up ahead. At first he thought it was an animal, maybe a wounded deer, but as he approached, the shape became clearer, a human figure, fragile and motionless. He swung off his horse in one swift motion and knelt beside the body. Under the moonlight, her skin gleamed unnaturally white, almost luminous. Long snowy hair spilled around her shoulders, streaked with dust and red. She wore Apache garments, ceremonial leather marked with rare white beadwork. Torn from struggle, a woman, young, fierce even in exhaustion, and unlike anyone he had ever seen. Luke touched her shoulder gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her breathing hitched, shallow and fast. Her eyes fluttered open, silver gray, startling against her pale skin. For a moment she stared at him, fear and confusion mingling in their depths. They were hunting me," she whispered. Her voice breaking, I couldn't hide any more. Luke scanned the dark ridgelines, his hand automatically drifting toward the grip of his revolver. The canyon felt too quiet. Whoever chased her might still be nearby. "Don't worry," he said softly. "You're safe now." Carefully, he wrapped his thick coat around her trembling body and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, as if made of air and moonlight. He mounted Copper with her held securely against his chest. With urgency tightening his grip on the reins, Luke turned toward his ranch. Whatever danger he'd stepped into tonight, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her to die in the desert, and the night was far from over. Inside Luke Harding's ranch house, the fire crackled softly, filling the small room with a warm, flickering glow. The wooden walls creaked as the desert wind pressed against them, but the warmth inside felt almost sacred compared to the cold, dangerous night beyond. Luke knelt beside the mysterious woman, Sawe, cleaning the dried blood from her wounds with gentle, steady hands. Her silver eyes followed his movements, cautious yet strangely trusting. She flinched only when he touched the deep gash at her side. "You're all right," Luke murmured. "It's not as bad as it looks. Whoever chased you, they won't get through my land tonight." But Sawe shook her head, her long white hair catching the firelight like strands of frost. "You don't understand," she whispered, voice soft, but weighted with something ancient. "They are afraid of what I am." Luke looked up, puzzled. "Albino Apache," he guessed. "I've heard folks in town talk about it like a myth." Sawe gave a tired, sad smile. "We are not myths, but we are rare, and rarity attracts fear." She shifted, wincing as she sat a little straighter. Luke offered her a cup of warm water, and she accepted it with trembling hands. "When an albino child is born," she continued, "the tribe believes she carries the visions of the ancestors. Some call it a blessing, others think it is a curse." Luke listened intently, feeling the weight of her words. "Is that why hunters were after you?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes darkening. "Not hunters," she finally said. "Outcasts. Men who believe turning me over to rival tribes will earn them power." Her voice cracked, revealing exhaustion deeper than her wounds. "I escaped under the moon. I prayed the spirits would guide someone to me." Luke felt a chill crawl down his spine, not from the cold, but from the sense that he had stumbled into something much larger than himself. "And your people?" he asked carefully. "Will they come looking?" Her gaze locked on his, intense and luminous. "They will come," she said. "Especially one." Luke's pulse quickened. "Who?" Sawe drew a slow breath as if summoning courage. "My mother. White Widow, the albino Apache matriarch. The fire popped sharply, as though reacting to the name. She follows the old laws, Saway continued. The laws of life-debt. You saved me, so the ancestors will bind you to the consequences. Luke leaned back, troubled. The desert outside had begun to pale with the first hints of dawn. Whatever comes, he said finally, I'll face it. Saway looked at him, really looked, and a flicker of hope crossed her face. Then sunrise will test us both. The first light of dawn crept over the desert like a slow-burning fire, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood-red. Luke stepped onto the porch of his ranch, the wooden boards cool beneath his boots. He rested a hand on his rifle, though he knew deep inside that bullets would mean little against whoever was coming. Saway stood behind him, leaning on the doorframe for support, her pale hair drifting in the morning breeze. They're close, she said quietly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and certainty. How do you know? Luke asked. She placed a hand over her heart. Because she is my mother. Her presence always arrives before she does. The ground began to vibrate, subtle at first, then unmistakable, hoofbeats, many of them. The sound echoed through the canyon, rolling toward the ranch like approaching thunder. Luke's jaw tightened as a formation of Apache riders emerged from the rising sun. Silhouettes backlit in brilliant gold. They rode in disciplined silence, each warrior painted with ceremonial marks of white clay, symbols of loyalty to the albino matriarch. Their spears glinted coldly in the dawn. At their center, riding a massive white mare, was White Widow herself. She looked almost unreal, tall, unfathomably calm, draped in white wolf furs that shimmered like snow. Her long hair, as pale as Saway's, flowed freely behind her. But it was her eyes that struck Luke, sharp, metallic, predatory, the eyes of a ruler accustomed to obedience. The riders formed a perfect circle around the ranch. Not a shout, not a threat, just silent occupation. White Widow stopped a few paces from the porch. When she dismounted, the warriors lowered their heads in unison. She walked forward with a staff carved from bleached mesquite, its top wound with silver feathers. Her gaze fell upon Luke first, measuring him as though he were a horse she was considering buying. "You are Luke Harding," she said, her voice smooth yet commanding. Luke nodded. "And you must be her mother." White Widow's eyes flicked toward Saway briefly, then back to Luke. "You brought my daughter into your home. You saved her life in the canyon at midnight." Luke swallowed. "Anyone would have." "No," she replied. "Only a man destined to be bound by our laws would cross her path on such a night." She raised her staff and pointed at his ranch, her warriors shifting with eerie unity. "By decree of the albino Apache, and by the law of life-debt, all that you possess, this land, this house, your cattle, belongs to our clan by sunrise." Luke froze, disbelief crashing over him. "You can't just—" But the warriors were already moving, stepping onto his land like it was theirs. Saway's breath caught behind him, and Luke realized the sun had fully risen. The claim was made. The desert sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across Luke's ranch as Apache warriors spread out, inspecting the corrals, touching fence posts, and marking the ground with white clay. Every gesture made Luke's stomach twist. This wasn't an attack. This was a takeover. White Widow stood in the center of the yard, staff planted firmly in the dirt like the root of some ancient judgment tree. Her pale eyes watched everything, cold and certain, as though the land already belonged to her. Luke clenched his fists. "I'm not handing over my ranch," he said, stepping forward. "Saving your daughter shouldn't cost me everything I have." White Widow did not even turn to face him. "The ancestors bind the debt, not me." Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of granite. "A life saved is a life claimed. This land will protect our futures just as you protected hers." Before Luke could speak again, Saway limped down the porch steps, her breath unsteady. She placed herself between her mother and Luke, raising a trembling hand. "Mother, stop," she pleaded. White Widow's gaze softened only slightly. "You are wounded. You should rest." "No," Saway shook her head. "You're twisting the old laws, using them for your gain. Luke saved me without knowing who I was, without asking for anything. How can you take everything from him as payment?" "Because payment must be equal to the gift," her mother replied. Saway stepped closer, voice rising. Then let me choose the payment. The law allows that too. White Widow's eyes narrowed. A murmur passed through the warriors. They had not expected her to invoke an ancient clause. And what payment would you offer, daughter? Saway swallowed hard, gathering strength. Freedom for his ranch. Release of your claim, and she hesitated, glancing at Luke with quiet resolve. Let me walk my own path, not as your possession, not as his. As someone who repays her debts by choice. The yard fell silent. For a long moment, White Widow seemed carved from stone. Then slowly she lifted her staff and tapped it once on the earth. So be it. The warriors froze, then stepped back from the property line. The ranch is his, she declared. But the bond between you and my daughter remains. If danger hunts her again, you will stand with her. Your fates are now intertwined. Luke exhaled, relief and confusion crashing together. White Widow mounted her horse. Before leaving, she looked at Luke with a rare hint of respect. Guard her well, cowboy, for she walks between worlds. With a final command, she and her warriors rode off, dust swirling behind them like fading spirits. Saway stood beside Luke as the last rider vanished over the ridge. That was nearly the end of your life here, she said softly. Luke gave a crooked smile. Maybe, but it might be the beginning of something else. Together they faced the rising sun, bound not by law but by fate.